Katie Beers. 2 days before her birthday, a young girl from Long Island disappeared, and the only lead investigators had was a recording of her own voice describing a stranger who had taken her. The voice was genuine. The account it gave was not. What searchers would eventually find beneath an ordinary garage in Bayshore, New York, stayed with the people who worked that case for the rest of their careers. It was December of 1992, and Katie Beers was a child whose home life had already been failing her in quiet ways for a long time. She was being raised in unstable circumstances, shuttled between adults, and she spent a great deal of her time in the care of a family acquaintance named John Esposito. He was a man roughly 33 years older than she was, and he was a man who had once been arrested in the 1970s for trying to take another child. The warning signs existed. Nobody connected them in time. On December 28, 1992, Esposito lured her to his home with the promise of birthday gifts. Once she was inside, he forced her into a space he had built and hidden beneath his garage. It was a concrete room about 6 feet by 7 feet, soundproofed, reached through a tunnel concealed behind a removable bookcase and a trap door that weighed close to 200 pounds. Then he did the thing that pointed the search in the wrong direction. He pressured her into recording a message claiming a stranger with a weapon had abducted her, and he played that recording near an arcade in Nesconset to make it look as though she had been taken from there. In plain terms, he built a hidden chamber beneath his own home and tried to convince the world that someone else was responsible. For a short while, it held. But the Suffolk County investigators assigned to the case kept circling back to Esposito himself. His old arrest record put him on their radar from the start. Then more evidence settled the question. Surveillance footage placed him entering that arcade alone, and audio analysis indicated the so-called kidnapping message had been recorded in advance rather than captured in the moment. The story he was telling stopped fitting the facts. If Esposito had simply walked away from the case at that point, this might have ended very differently. Instead, on January 13th, 1993, 17 days after she vanished, he confessed to his own attorneys and led police to the bunker. Katie was alive. What followed was years of legal process, and the channel that exists to tell these stories tends to live in exactly that part of them. Esposito pleaded guilty to kidnapping on June 16, 1994. On July 27, 1994, he was sentenced to 15 years to life, and 10 additional charges were dropped as part of the plea agreement. There was also a second prosecution running alongside it. The husband of Katie's godmother, a man named Sal Inghilleri, who had mistreated her before the abduction, was sentenced separately, in reporting placed at around 12 years. Esposito went on to be denied parole 4 separate times over the following years. He was found dead in his cell at Sing Sing on September 4, 2013, of coronary artery disease, only weeks after his 4th and final parole hearing. The case did more than convict one man. It forced a public reckoning with how thoroughly the systems meant to protect a child had failed this one, long before the abduction ever happened. And Katie Beers built a different life out of what was left to her. She was raised afterward by a foster family in East Hampton, earned a college degree, married, and became a mother of 2 living in rural Pennsylvania. On the 20th anniversary of her rescue, she published a memoir about everything she had survived. And today, she works as a New York Times best-selling author and a speaker. The girl whose recorded voice once sent searchers down the wrong road now uses that same voice, on her own terms, to talk about coming through the other side. Katie Beers spent 17 days underground before the truth came up for air. Across the country, another girl had been taken from a quiet road on an equally ordinary morning. For her, The waiting would not be counted in days. It would be counted in years. J.C. Lee Dugard. It was an ordinary walk to a school bus stop, the kind a child makes without a second thought. Witnesses saw a car slow down, saw her pulled inside, and then the road was empty again. For more than 18 years, the world assumed J.C. Dugard was gone for good. The truth was that she had been hidden in plain sight the entire time, less than a day's drive from where she vanished. It was June of 1991, and J.C. Lee Dugard was a young girl living with her family in Myers, California, near South Lake Tahoe. On the morning of June 10th, she was walking to her bus stop when a man named Philip Garrido and his wife Nancy Garrido pulled up beside her. Philip Garrido was a convicted offender who was, at that very moment, on federal parole, which is a detail worth holding on to, because it becomes the heart of the entire story. In front of witnesses, the couple forced J.C. into their car and drove away. They took her to their home in Antioch, California, where Garrido had built a concealed warren of tents and sheds behind the house, screened off from the street and from the neighbors. She was held there for more than 18 years. During that time, Garrido subjected her to ongoing abuse, and she gave birth to 2 daughters while in captivity. For nearly 2 decades, no one on the outside knew she was alive. The original searches in 1991 led nowhere, despite the eyewitnesses who had seen the car. The investigation went cold and stayed cold for most of a generation. The break, when it finally came in August of 2009, arrived almost by accident, and the detail that broke the case is the one worth pausing on, because it explains everything that followed. Garrido walked onto the University of California, Berkeley campus with the 2 girls to request a permit for a religious event. 2 campus officers, Lisa Campbell and Allie Jacobs, found his behavior and the children's demeanor unsettling, and rather than let it go, they contacted his parole officer. Summoned to a parole office on August 26, 2009, Garrido showed up with J.C. herself, and over the course of that meeting, she eventually revealed who she really was. The case had been broken not by the search, but by 2 officers who trusted their instincts. The legal reckoning was substantial. Both Garridos pleaded guilty on April 28, 2011. On June 2, 2011, Judge Douglas Phimister sentenced Philip Garrido to 431 years to life and sentenced Nancy Garrido to 36 years to life. Philip Garrido is held in a California prison and is not expected ever to be released. Nancy Garrido is held at the California Institution for Women, and she does not become eligible for parole until August of 2029. There was an accounting on the state's side as well. Because Garrido had been on parole the entire time, the supervision failures were impossible to ignore, and the state of California compensated J.C. Dugard $20 million through a settlement signed into law in July of 2010, which passed the legislature by overwhelming margins and acknowledged the corrections lapses that had allowed her captivity to continue uninterrupted. The case also became a turning point in how California monitored offenders living in the community on parole, exposing exactly how a registered, supervised man had managed to hide a kidnapped child in his own backyard for the better part of 2 decades. J.C. Dugard turned the years that were stolen from her into something for other people. She wrote 2 best-selling books, and she founded the JAYC Foundation, which provides therapy, including animal-assisted therapy, to families recovering from abduction and trauma, and which trains law enforcement to handle these cases better. As of today, Philip Garrido remains behind bars. Nancy Garrido's first parole eligibility is still years away, and J.C. Dugard continues her advocacy work. For her, the story did not end at the rescue. In many ways, it started there. Philip Garrido was a man the system was supposed to be supervising the entire time. So was the man at the center of the next case. And in Idaho, the failure to keep track of someone with a long and violent record would cost an entire family almost everything they had. Shasta Groene. It was just before 2 in the morning at a Denny's in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, when a member of the staff looked twice at a young girl sitting quietly in a booth. The girl had been missing for nearly 7 weeks, and her face had been on flyers across the region. Within minutes, staff and patrons had quietly alerted the police. The recognition that ended one ordeal had begun with one of the most devastating crimes in the state's recent history. Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, May of 2005. Shasta Groene was a child living with her family in a home off Interstate 90. Her mother, Brenda, was 40. Brenda's partner, Mark McKenzie, was 37. Shasta had an older brother and a younger brother, and by every account, it was an ordinary household, until a stranger began watching it. That stranger was a man named Joseph Edward Duncan III, a fugitive offender who was on the run from charges in Minnesota at the time. He surveilled the family's home, then forced his way inside. On May 16, 2005, he took the lives of Shasta's mother, her older brother, and her mother's partner, and he abducted Shasta and her younger brother. He drove the 2 children to a remote campsite in Montana, where he subjected them to abuse, and where her younger brother did not survive. Those are the facts, stated plainly. And they are, as far as this account will go into them. The investigation that surrounded Shasta's disappearance was one of the largest in Kootenai County history, drawing more than 100 FBI personnel and dozens of additional investigators across multiple states. For nearly 7 weeks, there was almost nothing to go on. The case turned entirely on the moment she was recognized in that diner and recovered safely. Once police arrived, Duncan was taken into custody at the restaurant without incident, and the man who had eluded one of the largest manhunts in the region's history was finally in handcuffs. After that, much of what authorities came to understand came directly from her own account. Based on what she was able to tell them, investigators located the remote Montana campsite and recovered her younger brother's remains near St. Regis. A child's testimony carried the part of the case that nothing else could. In court, the process moved on 2 separate tracks, which is part of why this case is studied the way it is. In Idaho State Court, on October 16, 2005, Duncan pleaded guilty to 3 counts of taking a life and 3 counts of kidnapping, and he received consecutive life sentences. In federal court, he pleaded guilty in December of 2007, and on August 27, 2008, a federal jury imposed 3 death sentences along with additional life terms. He was also sentenced in California in connection with the earlier death of a child there in 1997. He had carried a long record across state lines for years, and the case became part of a national conversation about how states track, classify, and confine offenders after release, and about how someone with his history had been free to move at all. And yet, for all of those sentences, Joseph Edward Duncan III was never executed. He spent the rest of his life on federal death row and died of brain cancer in Terre Haute on March 28, 2021. The death sentences were never carried out. For years, Shasta Groene stayed out of public view and rebuilt her life away from cameras, which was her right and her choice. After Duncan's death, she chose to come forward, sharing her story in documentary programs in order to help others in situations like the one she had survived. As of today, the man responsible is gone, and Shasta Groen remains one of the very few people able to describe what happened in her own words. She has decided to use that for the benefit of other people. Shasta Groen's survival came down to a stranger in a diner who trusted what she was seeing. Decades earlier, in California, another child's survival came down to something even rarer. A boy who, after years in captivity, made the decision to save someone smaller than himself. Stephen Stainer. In the early spring of 1980, a teenage boy walked into a police station in Ukiah, California, holding the hand of a much younger child, and told the officers something that stopped them where they stood. He told them that he knew his own first name was Stephen. He had been missing for 7 years. The smaller boy beside him had been missing for 2 weeks. It was December of 1972, and Stephen Stainer was a young boy walking home from school in Merced, California. On December 4th of that year, a convicted offender named Kenneth Parnell, working with an accomplice named Irvin Murphy, who posed as a representative of a church, lured Stephen into a car. Parnell told the boy a lie that would shape the next 7 years of his life, that his parents no longer wanted him. He renamed the child Dennis, moved him from place to place across California, and subjected him to ongoing abuse the entire time. For 7 years, that was Stephen's reality, and the world outside believed he was simply gone. Then, in February of 1980, Parnell took a second, much younger boy. And this time, Stephen, by then a teenager, decided he would not let the same thing happen again. On the 1st of March, 1980, while Parnell was away at work, Stephen took the younger boy, hitchhiked to Ukiah, and walked straight into the police station. Parnell was arrested by the following morning, and 2 missing children went home. Here is where the legal outcome becomes hard to absorb. Kenneth Parnell was convicted in 1981 of kidnapping both boys, and he was sentenced to 7 years. He served roughly 5 of them and was paroled in 1985. He was never charged in connection with the abuse itself, because of jurisdictional limits and the statute of limitations as they stood at the time. And no, that is not an overstatement of how the case resolved. For taking 2 children and for holding one of them for 7 years, the man was a free citizen again within about 5 years. Murphy and a teenage accomplice received sentences of their own. For many people who followed the case, that disparity has never stopped being the most disturbing part of it. Kenneth Parnell could have faded into a quiet old age after that. He did not. In January of 2003, at 71 years old, he tried to arrange the purchase of a young boy for $500 through his caretaker's sister, who went straight to the police. He was convicted in 2004 under California's 3 strikes law and sentenced to 25 years to life. He died in prison in Vacaville on January 21st, 2008, at 76. Stephen Stainer's own story carries a heavy ending. He struggled to readjust to the life that had been interrupted, and he faced cruelty from people who should have known better. But he married and had 2 children of his own. On September 16, 1989, he lost his life in a motorcycle collision, a hit and run, at the age of 24. 500 people attended his funeral, and the younger boy he had once carried out of captivity served as one of his pallbearers. That boy grew up to become a sheriff's deputy and passed away in 2010. There is one more difficult note to this family's history. Stephen's older brother, Cary Stainer, was later convicted in 2002 of taking the lives of 4 women near Yosemite. His case was told in a 1989 television miniseries and again in a 2022 documentary series. But the boy who once told police he knew his first name was Stephen spent the rest of his short life trying to be known for something more than the 7 years that were taken from him. Stephen Stainer walked himself out of captivity and into a police station. Years later, and an ocean away in Austria, another child would also have to engineer her own escape. The difference was that she would spend more than twice as long waiting for the chance to do it. Natasha Kampusch, 3,096 days. That is how long a girl from Vienna was held in a windowless cellar beneath a stranger's garage. She was taken as a child on her way to school, and for more than 8 years, the entire world she knew was a soundproofed room and the man who had built it. When her chance to get out finally came, it came down to a single phone call. It was March of 1998, and Natasha Kampusch was a young girl walking to school in Vienna, Austria. On March 2nd of that year, a communications technician named Wolfgang Priklopil pulled her into his white van. He held her in a small, windowless, soundproofed cellar beneath his garage in Strasshof, just outside Vienna. The space was barely large enough to stand in. Over the years, he gradually allowed her up into the house to cook and clean, and in the long hours of confinement, she taught herself using books and the radio, holding on to some version of an education in a place designed to erase her. She was held there for 8.5 years, and during that time she was subjected to control and abuse. What still does not sit right, even now, is how close the case came to ending much sooner. Just weeks after the abduction in 1998, a police officer actually questioned Priklopil about his white van, which matched a description tied to the disappearance, and the lead was simply not pursued. For more than 8 years, that missed thread held, while a child grew up underground. Then, on August 23rd, 2006, by then a young woman, Natasha was vacuuming Priklopil's car when he stepped a short distance away to take a phone call. For the first time since 1998, she was outside and unwatched. She ran. She made it to a neighbor's window, gave her name and the year she had disappeared, and begged them to call the police. The captivity was over. Within hours of her escape, Priklopil took his own life. What came next became a national scandal in Austria, and it played out almost entirely in the realm of accountability and official failure. That early questioning about the van, weeks after she went missing, was exposed publicly, and a former head of the country's federal criminal office went so far as to allege a cover-up of how badly the early lead had been handled. A special commission was formed, and a later international review in 2013, which drew on assistance from the FBI and Germany's federal police, concluded that Priklopil had acted alone, while sharply criticizing the misjudgments made early in the investigation. In 2008, the Austrian chancellor at the time, Alfred Gusenbauer, opened formal compensation discussions with Kampusch's lawyers over how the case had been handled from the very beginning. For a country that prided itself on its institutions, the realization that a child had been questioned about, searched for, and then effectively forgotten for more than 8 years was difficult to face. Natasha Kampusch built a public life on her own terms after all of it. She wrote a memoir named for the 3,096 days of her captivity, which was adapted into a film released in 2013. And she followed it with a second book about the years of freedom that came afterward. She briefly hosted a talk show on Austrian television and became, almost against her will, one of the most recognized survivors of an abduction case in Europe. She also did something almost no one expected. She took legal ownership of the house where she had been held, and the cellar itself was filled in by 2011, sealed off so that it could never be used again. As of today, she lives a largely private life in Vienna. The room that was built to keep her hidden no longer exists. The woman it was built to hold is still here. If you like this video and haven't subscribed yet, now's a great time to join. We post a new case every day, so hit subscribe and don't miss what's coming next. Luis Armando Albino. In the summer of 2024, a man in his late 70s opened his front door to relatives he had not seen since he was a small child. For more than 70 years, a family in California had never stopped wondering what happened to the little boy who was let out of a neighborhood park one afternoon and never came home. The answer, when it finally arrived, did not come from a detective or a deathbed confession. It came from a home DNA test taken by a curious niece. The case had gone quiet for so long that almost no one believed it would ever be solved. There was no suspect, no ransom, no trace. Just a mother who searched for her son until the day she died. It started on an ordinary afternoon in West Oakland, California, in February of 1951. As a small child, Luis Armando Albino had been born in Puerto Rico and was living with his family in West Oakland. On February 21st, 1951, he was playing in a local park with his older brother Roger when a woman approached him. She spoke to him gently in Spanish and promised to buy him candy if he came along. He trusted her. He went with her. And that was the last his Oakland family would see of him for the better part of a century. The woman took him out of California and eventually all the way to the East Coast, where he was handed over to a couple he would grow up believing were his parents. He had no reason to doubt it. He grew up under their roof, served 2 tours in Vietnam with the Marine Corps, became a firefighter, raised children of his own, and watched grandchildren come along. For more than 70 years, he believed he knew exactly who he was and where he had come from. Back in Oakland, the truth was working its way toward the surface, slowly, through a strand of genetic code. In 2020, his niece, Aleida Aliquin, took an at-home DNA test, mostly out of curiosity, and received a 22% match with a man she did not recognize. At the time, it seemed like a small thing. It was not. In early 2024, she returned to the question in earnest, pairing that DNA match with old Oakland Tribune clippings she pulled from library microfilm and with family photographs that had survived the decades. She brought all of it to the authorities. The Oakland Police Department, the FBI, and the California Department of Justice worked together to verify what she had assembled, and the match held. The unknown man was Luis Albino. There would be no courtroom in this story, no sentencing, no parole hearings. The woman who took him was never identified, and no one was ever charged. The kidnapping itself technically remains an open investigation to this day, even as the missing persons case that had defined his family for 73 years was finally closed. 73 years. That is not a typo. And on June 24th, 2024, Luis Albino reunited with the family that had refused to give up on him. He met the relatives who had kept his memory alive. He saw his older brother Roger again, the same brother who had been standing beside him in that park on the day he vanished. Roger died that August, only weeks after the two of them were reunited. Luis Albino has chosen to keep the reunion private and has declined interviews, which is entirely his right after a lifetime that was taken out of his hands once already. His case is now pointed to as one of the clearest examples of how genetic genealogy can solve an abduction that every traditional method failed to crack for generations. As of today, no perpetrator has ever been named. And the little boy who was let out of a West Oakland park came home an old man, on his own terms, after a lifetime away. Luis Albino's truth surfaced through a fragment of DNA and a stack of brittle newspaper clippings. In Florida, another stolen child would uncover the truth about herself in a far more ordinary way. She would go looking for a simple piece of paper that proved she existed and discover that, on every record that mattered, she never had. Camilla Mobley. A teenage girl in South Carolina sat down to apply for her first job and ran straight into a problem that made no sense. She had no valid birth certificate. She had no working Social Security number. On paper, the young woman everyone knew as Alexis did not appear to exist at all, and the reason reached back to a hospital in Florida in a single afternoon 18 years earlier. How does a newborn vanish from a hospital and stay missing for 18 years? The answer begins on July 10, 1998, in Jacksonville, Florida, where a baby girl named Camilla Mobley was born at University Medical Center. Roughly 8 hours after she was born, a woman dressed as a nurse walked into the maternity ward. You would think someone would have stopped a stranger from carrying a newborn out the doors. No one did. The woman, later identified as Gloria Williams, was around 33, and by later accounts, she had recently lost a pregnancy and was struggling badly. She befriended Camilla's young birth mother, who was still a teenager herself, earned her trust over the course of a few hours, and then walked out of the hospital with the newborn in her arms. She drove north to Walterboro, South Carolina, renamed the baby Alexis, and raised her there as her own daughter. For 18 years, the girl grew up with no idea that any of it had happened. By most accounts, she was raised with affection, which is part of what has always made this case so difficult to hold. A child was loved and also stolen, and both of those things were true at once. The unraveling started with paperwork. When the teenager tried to find work and could not produce valid identification, the questions began, and eventually Williams admitted the truth, that the girl had been taken as an infant. 2 separate tips came into the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and investigators traced the lead to South Carolina. Because there had never been a newborn photograph to compare against, they had relied for years on an age-progressed composite image and on a few distinctive physical markers that had been noted right after birth. A DNA test erased any remaining doubt. On January 13, 2017, it was official. Alexis was Camilla Mobley. The legal process was where the case truly settled. Gloria Williams pleaded guilty in February of 2018 to kidnapping and to interference with custody. On June 8, 2018, Circuit Judge Marianne Aho sentenced her to 18 years in prison, 1 year for each year she had kept Camilla from her family, with credit for the time she had already served, along with a concurrent 5-year term on the second charge. As part of the plea, she was permanently barred from ever profiting from the crime. But the sentence did not put an end to the fight. A motion to reduce it was denied in March of 2022, even after Camilla herself wrote a letter of support asking the court to let the only mother she had ever known come home. Into 2024 and 2025, Williams kept filing post-conviction motions, and new counsel was appointed to take up her case. Gloria Williams remains incarcerated in Florida, with a projected release date around 2032. Camilla Mobley, for her part, has built relationships with both the family she was born into and the woman who raised her. And she answers to both names depending on where she is and who she is with. She has spoken about her story publicly in television appearances. Her birth mother, who had her baby taken from her only hours after giving birth, reached a settlement with the hospital that was widely reported at $1.5 million, paid out over time, and the case pushed hospitals across the country to tighten the security around their newborns. As of today, Gloria Williams is still behind bars, and the question of which family and which name to claim belongs, at last, to Camilla alone. For Camilla Mobley, the truth came out because a job application asked her to prove who she was. Hundreds of miles to the north, in Ohio, a teenage honor student was about to stumble over the very same kind of gap. He went looking for his social security number, and what he found would reveal that even his name was not really his. Julian Hernandez. For 13 years, a man and his son lived quietly in Cleveland, Ohio, under names that belonged to no one. The boy was a high-achieving student and a martial arts athlete who had no idea that the man he called his father had taken him from his mother and erased both of their real identities. The whole arrangement held together until the boy did something completely ordinary. He sat down to apply to college. It was August of 2002, and Julian Hernandez was a young child living with his mother near Birmingham, Alabama. On the 28th of that month, in the middle of a custody breakup, his father, Bobby Hernandez, took Julian out of his mother's custody and drove him roughly 700 miles north to Cleveland. There, he constructed false identities for both of them and lived for years under an assumed name. Julian grew up under that invented name, an honor student who excelled at almost everything he tried, with no memory and no knowledge that his whole life rested on a lie. It is worth being precise about who Bobby Hernandez actually was, because a great deal of what circulates online about this case is simply false. He was not an undocumented immigrant, and he was not deported. According to the Associated Press, he was a United States Navy veteran with no significant criminal history before any of this happened. The truth of the case is strange enough without the invented details that have been attached to it. The whole thing came apart in 2015. While applying to college, Julian discovered a discrepancy tied to his social security number. He carried that confusion to a school guidance counselor and told the counselor, plainly, that he believed he might have been kidnapped as a child. The counselor reached out to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which had carried Julian on its rolls as a missing child since 2002. That single conversation set the FBI in motion, and on November 2nd, 2015, Bobby Hernandez was arrested in Cleveland. In Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court, before Judge Cassandra Collier Williams, Bobby Hernandez pleaded guilty in March of 2016 to 14 counts, which included 2 counts of kidnapping, 10 counts of tampering with records, 2 counts of interference with custody, and 1 count of forgery. On April 13, 2016, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. He had faced the possibility of up to 54 years. There was a second front as well. Jefferson County, Alabama, had issued a felony interference with custody warrant, a charge that could carry up to 10 years. But whether Alabama ever pursued an extradition or a prosecution is not documented in any reliable reporting, and his exact release date has never been publicly confirmed. Absent any early release, a 4-year term that began in late 2015 would have run its course around late 2019. The most striking moment of the entire case came at sentencing, and it came from Julian himself. Then 19 years old, he stood up in court and forgave his father. He told the room that even if other people could not forgive what had been done, he did, and he asked the judge to show his father leniency. He also reconnected with his biological mother, spending time with her over the holidays once the truth had come out. Since then, Julian Hernandez has asked for privacy, and for the most part, he has been granted it. A great deal of what is published online claiming to describe his life today is unreliable, much of it generated to fill pages rather than to inform. And out of respect for the privacy he asked for, this account will not pretend to know. What is on the record is simpler and more human. A young man chose forgiveness over anger in open court, and then stepped quietly out of the spotlight. Every case to this point was built on something physical: a hidden bunker, a concealed compound, a set of forged documents, a stolen name. The next one introduced a kind of danger that had barely existed a generation earlier. The man who took Alicia Kozakiewicz never had to set foot in her neighborhood to find her. He reached her through a computer screen. Alicia Kozakiewicz. On the first day of 2002, a teenage girl left her family's home in Pittsburgh to meet someone she trusted completely. She had never once seen his face in person. She knew him only as a presence on the other side of a screen, someone who had spent the better part of a year patiently earning her trust. Within hours, she was held in a basement in another state. And the only reason she is alive today is that a stranger she also never met happened to be paying attention. It was the start of 2002, and Alicia Kozakiewicz was a young student in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Growing up at the dawn of the era when children and the internet first truly collided. For nearly a year, a man she believed she understood had been speaking with her online, slowly and deliberately manipulating her trust. That man was Scott Tyree, a 38-year-old computer programmer from Herndon, Virginia. On New Year's Day, Tyree persuaded her to leave her home, lured her into his vehicle, and drove her across state lines to Virginia, where he held her in a basement and subjected her to abuse. She was there for 4 days. What ended it was almost impossible to have planned for. Tyree had been sharing the abuse online, and an anonymous person who came across it recognized Alicia from the missing child alerts that had gone out after she disappeared. That person contacted the FBI and handed over the screen name Tyree had been using. Working from that single username, and with emergency cooperation from the online service involved, agents traced it to an address in Herndon. On January 4, 2002, they freed her, and Tyree was arrested soon afterward. In 2003, in federal court for the Western District of Pennsylvania, Scott Tyree pleaded guilty to charges that included transporting a minor across state lines for unlawful purposes, along with separate offenses involving illegal material. In September of 2003, he was sentenced to 19 years and 7 months in federal prison. But Tyree was not finished, and this is where the story stretches across 2 decades. He was released in February of 2019 to a halfway house, then sent back to prison in October of that same year for violating the terms of his supervised release. He was released again in September of 2021. Then, in October of 2025, he was arrested yet again and charged with stalking and the possession of illegal material. According to local investigative reporting, he pleaded guilty to the stalking charge and was set to be sentenced near the end of 2025, with the remaining charge still moving through the courts. The detail that makes it remarkable is who helped bring those charges. Alicia and her partner had been quietly monitoring his online activity for years. What Alicia Kozakiewicz did with her survival is the reason her name is known far beyond Pennsylvania. As a young teenager, barely a year after she was taken, she founded an advocacy project in her own name. She has since testified before Congress, helped pass the Protect Our Children Act in 2008, and become the namesake of Alicia's Law, which funds internet crimes against children task forces and has been enacted in state after state. Her work fundamentally changed how these cases are investigated and how that investigation gets paid for. There is even a police dog, named Kozak in her honor, trained to detect hidden electronics. As of today, she remains one of the most recognized internet safety advocates in the world. And the man who took her is, once again, answering for his conduct in a courtroom. That police dog named in Alicia's honor was more than a tribute. Years later, in Wisconsin, a dog by that same name would join the search for another missing teenage girl. In a case that opened with unthinkable violence, and closed with one of the most extraordinary self-rescues anyone in law enforcement could remember. Jamie Kloss. She was a teenager from a small town in Wisconsin, and the man who took her had never once met her. He had no connection to her family, no history with them, nothing. He had simply watched her step off a school bus one morning and decided that he would have her. And to get to her, he was willing to do something monstrous. Barron, Wisconsin, the early morning hours of October 15th, 2018. Jamie Kloss was a teenage girl living with her parents, James and Denise Kloss, in the family home near Barron. James was 56. Denise was 46. A 21-year-old man named Jake Thomas Patterson, who had no relationship with the family of any kind, had spotted Jamie boarding her school bus and become fixated on taking her. He made 2 earlier attempts that he abandoned at the last moment. Then, in the dark of that October morning, he forced his way into the house. He took the lives of both of her parents, restrained Jamie, and drove her roughly 70 miles to a cabin in Gordon, Wisconsin. At the cabin, Patterson hid her in a space beneath a bed, at times barricaded with weights and storage containers so that she could not get out and could not be found. She was held there for 88 days. Through the frantic search, through the national headlines, through the holidays, while the people looking for her had no idea where to even begin. In the weeks she was missing, the search became one of the largest in Wisconsin's recent history. Thousands of tips came in. Volunteers walked fields, ditches, and tree lines across the county. An Amber Alert went out, her face went up in windows and on billboards, and reward money was raised. And through all of it, she was barely 70 miles from her own home, hidden under a bed, and not a single one of those efforts came close to her. Then, on January 10th, 2019, Patterson left the cabin for a while. Jamie pushed the barricade aside, climbed out, and fled into the freezing cold wearing a pair of his shoes. She came upon a woman named Jean Nutter, who happened to be out walking her dog, and asked her for help. Nutter brought her to a nearby home where they called for emergency help. Patterson was arrested within minutes, and when an officer confronted him, he admitted that he had done it. The legal process moved quickly. Patterson pleaded guilty in March of 2019 to 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide and 1 count of kidnapping. On May 24, 2019, Judge James Babler sentenced him to 2 consecutive terms of life in prison, without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 40 years. The judge described him from the bench as the embodiment of evil. Because Wisconsin has no death penalty, life without parole was the harshest sentence the law allowed, and that is exactly what he received. He was later placed on the state's offender registry. In court, Jamie Kloss spoke for herself, through a statement read on her behalf. She said that she had taken back her freedom, and that the man who had upended her entire life would never be able to take it from her again. After everything, she went to live with an aunt and uncle, and she has worked slowly and privately to rebuild her life far from cameras and attention. The Wisconsin State Assembly honored her as a hometown hero for the sheer courage it took to free herself when no one was coming for her. The detective work, the volunteers, the tip lines, all of the machinery built to find a missing child, none of it was what brought her home. As of today, Jake Patterson is serving life without parole, and Jamie Kloss is living quietly on her own terms. In the end, the only person who managed to get her out of that cabin was Jamie Kloss herself. Melissa Highsmith. For 51 years, a mother in Fort Worth, Texas, believed her baby daughter had vanished forever. She searched, she begged, She endured decades of people accusing her of harming her own child. And the entire time, her daughter was living less than 20 minutes away. Same city, same zip code, raised under a different name by the woman who took her. In 1971, a 22-year-old single mother named Alta Apantenko placed a newspaper ad looking for a babysitter. She was recently separated, working as a waitress, and just trying to keep things together. A woman calling herself Ruth Johnson answered the ad. Johnson never showed up to the in-person meeting at the restaurant. But she called again, said she had a nice big yard, said she looked after other children. So the mother hired her over the phone. On August 23rd, Ruth Johnson arrived at the apartment while Alta was at work. A roommate described her as a heavy-set woman wearing white, gloves, a headscarf, and an all-white outfit that looked like a nurse's uniform. The roommate handed over 21-month-old Melissa Highsmith. Ruth Johnson never came back. Fort Worth police and the FBI investigated, but the case went cold within months. Melissa's mother published a front-page plea in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, begging the woman to call her, saying she had been going out of her mind. Over the next 5 decades, more than 4 women came forward believing they were Melissa. DNA ruled out every single one. Police reopened the case in 2005, but leads dried up again. In September of 2022, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received an anonymous tip pointing to Charleston, South Carolina. It turned out to be false, but the media attention that followed breathed new life into the search. Then, in November of 2022, Melissa's biological father submitted his DNA to the consumer genetics platform 23andMe. Within 3 weeks, the database matched him to 3 grandchildren belonging to a Fort Worth woman going by the name Melanie Brown. The family reached out to her through Facebook. She thought it was a scam at first, but when she confronted the woman who had raised her, the woman confirmed it. She told her she was baby Melissa. A matching birthmark on her upper back provided further confirmation. On November 26, 2022, Melissa met her biological parents and siblings for the first time in 51 years. Fort Worth police completed official DNA confirmation the following May. The true identity of Ruth Johnson has never been definitively confirmed. The woman who raised Melissa claimed she purchased her for $500 on the street from an older woman back in 1972. But Melissa herself believes this woman was the same person who answered the ad and took her. The woman has since gone silent and ceased all communication. So, after 51 years, after a case that made national headlines and broke a family apart for half a century, was anyone held accountable? No. The criminal statute of limitations in Texas expired roughly 20 years after Melissa's 18th birthday, somewhere around 2007. No charges have been or can be filed. Fort Worth police have stated they remain committed to completing the investigation, but they have acknowledged that no prosecution is possible. Melissa was raised under the name Melanie Mayoko. She described a childhood marked by abuse and isolation. She was told she had been born at home, told she had brain damage, forbidden from playing outside. She ran away as a teenager and lived on the streets before eventually marrying and having 3 children. After the reunion, she legally changed her name back to Melissa Highsmith at the Tarrant County Courthouse in May of 2023. She became an advocate for cold case awareness in Fort Worth. She has said that her entire life, she never really felt like she belonged anywhere, and that she finally does. As of 2025, Melissa lives in Fort Worth with her husband. She is reconnected with her 4 siblings and both biological parents, who are alive. The woman who raised her remains publicly unidentified and uncharged. The police investigation is technically still open, but it exists now for information only. This is one of the longest-running missing persons cases in American history, and it was solved not by law enforcement, but by a family that refused to stop looking. But Melissa Highsmith's case, as staggering as it is, involved a toddler who had no memory of being taken. The next story is about a boy who was old enough to remember everything, who lived with his captor for years, and who even posted on his own missing persons page while no one realized he was still alive. Sean Hornbeck. On October 6, 2002, an 11-year-old boy named Sean Hornbeck was riding his lime green bicycle to a friend's house near Richwoods, Missouri, about 55 miles southwest of St. Louis. A white Nissan pickup truck, driven by a man named Michael John Devlin, struck the boy's bike and knocked him off. Devlin approached as if to help, then took Sean at gunpoint, telling him he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Devlin was a pizza shop manager at Emo's Pizza in Kirkwood, Missouri, who also worked part-time at a funeral home. He had no prior criminal record. He was a complete stranger to the Hornbeck family. Devlin held Sean for 4 years, 3 months, and 6 days. During the first month, Sean was bound to a futon with duct tape over his mouth in Devlin's apartment in Kirkwood. He was repeatedly harmed. At one point, Devlin drove Sean to a remote logging road and attempted to end his life by strangulation. Sean resisted and begged, promising to do anything. His stepfather later called it a deal with the devil. Over time, Devlin loosened the restrictions. He gave Sean internet access, a cell phone, and allowed him to have friendships. Sean lived under the name Sean Devlin and was presented as the man's son. And in one detail that still haunts investigators, Sean posted a message on his own parents' missing persons website asking how long they planned to keep looking for their son. On January 8, 2007, Devlin abducted a second child, 13-year-old Ben Ownby, near Beaufort, Missouri, as the boy stepped off his school bus. A 15-year-old neighbor witnessed it and described the white pickup truck. 4 days later, Kirkwood police officers were at Devlin's apartment complex to serve an unrelated warrant when they spotted a truck matching the description. FBI agents interviewed Devlin, who mentioned a godson named Sean. One of the agents noticed Devlin's pulse spike each time the name came up and bluffed about forensic tire evidence. Devlin broke down and admitted the truth. Both boys were found inside the apartment playing video games. The dual rescue became known as the Missouri Miracle. How does the legal system respond to a man who held a child captive for more than 4 years and then took another? Devlin faced more than 80 state felony charges across 4 jurisdictions, plus 6 federal counts. On October 8th and 9th of 2007, he pleaded guilty to all charges. His attorneys acknowledged that a torture videotape made any trial defense impossible. The sentences came down hard. Life in prison from Franklin County, 3 life sentences plus 60 years from Washington County, 18 consecutive life sentences from St. Louis County. Then, on December 21st, 2007, a federal judge added 170 years on child exploitation and transport charges. The total effective sentence came to 74 life terms plus 2,020 years, with no realistic possibility of parole. Sean returned to his family in Richwoods and underwent extensive counseling. His parents had founded the Sean Hornbeck Foundation during his disappearance, though it closed in 2013 due to funding issues. In 2008, Sean spoke publicly for the first time in an interview with CBS. He has since largely retreated from public life. As of 2025, Devlin remains incarcerated in a Missouri state prison. He was stabbed by a fellow inmate in April of 2011, but survived. He is approximately 60 years old and will die behind bars. Sean Hornbeck is now around 34 and lives privately in the St. Louis area. Sean's story is one of prolonged captivity at the hands of a stranger. But the abduction that would reshape American law, expand the Amber Alert system, and become one of the most recognized cases in the country began just 2 months before Sean was taken, in a quiet bedroom in Salt Lake City. Elizabeth Smart. At roughly 1:30 in the morning on June 5, 2002, a man named Brian David Mitchell cut through a window screen at the Smart family home in Salt Lake City's Federal Heights neighborhood. He entered the bedroom that 14-year-old Elizabeth shared with her younger sister, threatened her with a weapon, and warned that he would harm her family if she made a sound. He forced her to walk 4 miles in her pajamas into the Wasatch Mountains, where his wife, Wanda Barzee, was waiting at a crude campsite. Elizabeth's younger sister pretended to be asleep out of fear and did not alert her parents for roughly 2 hours. Mitchell, a drifter who called himself Emmanuel, had previously done brief handyman work for the Smart family. Elizabeth's father had hired him to repair the roof. Mitchell had a deeply troubled history. He had been arrested as a teenager for inappropriate behavior involving a child, had been divorced twice amid abuse allegations, and had been excommunicated from the LDS Church. He had written a 27-page manifesto and claimed divine revelation, commanding him to take multiple young brides, with Elizabeth intended to be the first. For 9 months, Elizabeth endured conditions that are difficult to describe. She was harmed multiple times daily, restrained by a cable, forced to consume alcohol, and repeatedly starved. The captors moved her between a mountain campsite, various locations in Salt Lake City while disguised in white robes and veils, and camps under bridges in San Diego County, California. At one point on the mountain, she could hear search teams calling her name. In another near miss, a detective confronted the trio in a Salt Lake City library, but left after Mitchell refused to remove Elizabeth's veil. The break came in October of 2002, when Elizabeth's sister suddenly recalled that the voice of the man who took her belonged to Emmanuel. Police were slow to act on this lead. Frustrated, the Smart family held their own press conference in February of 2003, releasing a composite sketch. Mitchell's own family members recognized him within days. On March 12, 2003, citizens in Sandy, Utah spotted the trio and called police. Elizabeth was wearing a gray wig and sunglasses and initially gave a false name, but officers quickly confirmed her identity. After the rescue, the case produced one of the longest competency battles in modern American legal history. Could the legal system actually hold this man accountable? Or would he manipulate his way out of facing trial? Mitchell was ruled incompetent to stand trial in July of 2005 and confined to Utah State Hospital. He disrupted every hearing by singing hymns. When state proceedings stalled completely, federal prosecutors stepped in during 2008, indicting Mitchell on interstate kidnapping charges. In October of 2009, Elizabeth testified for 105 minutes, describing Mitchell as wicked, manipulative, and slimy. On March 1, 2010, a federal judge ruled Mitchell competent in a 149-page opinion, calling his disruptive behavior a deliberate contrivance. At trial in November of 2010, Elizabeth testified for 3 days. On December 10th, the jury found Mitchell guilty. On May 25, 2011, he received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Wanda Barzee pleaded guilty to federal kidnapping charges and a state conspiracy charge for attempting to abduct Elizabeth's cousin 1 month after the original abduction. She was sentenced to 15 years federal plus 1 to 15 years state to run concurrently. She was released on September 19, 2018, after her legal team successfully argued that her time in the state hospital counted toward her sentence. Elizabeth publicly opposed the early release. Elizabeth Smart went on to become one of America's most prominent child safety advocates. She graduated from Brigham Young University, served a mission in Paris, married in 2012, and has 3 children. She founded the Elizabeth Smart Foundation, authored a best-selling memoir, and has served as a news contributor. Her advocacy helped expand the Amber Alert system and influence the passage of the Adam Walsh Act in 2006. As of 2025, Mitchell is 72 years old and incarcerated at a federal correctional institution in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, after being transferred following assaults by other inmates. He will die in prison. Barzee, approximately 80, lives in Salt Lake City. In May of 2025, she was arrested for violating sex offender registry conditions by visiting parks, telling police she had been commanded to by a higher power. She faces 2 misdemeanor charges, with a court date set for July of 2025. Elizabeth Smart continues her advocacy work and produced a Netflix documentary released in January of 2026. Elizabeth Smart's case involved a single victim and a 9-month ordeal. But in Cleveland, Ohio, a bus driver was holding 3 women inside a single house for nearly a decade. And the truth of what happened at 2207 Seymour Avenue would not come to light until one of them broke through a door and called 911. If cases like this one are the kind of content you come back for, consider subscribing. We cover them every week, and it really helps to grow my channel. Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight. Between August of 2002 and April of 2004, a Cleveland City bus driver named Ariel Castro took 3 women from the same stretch of Lorraine Avenue and kept them inside his home at 2207 Seymour Avenue for roughly a decade. Michelle Knight, who now goes by Lily Rose Lee, was the first. She was 21 when she disappeared on or around August 22, 2002, after leaving a cousin's house on her way to a custody hearing for her son. Castro offered her a ride. She accepted because she knew one of his daughters. He brought her inside and held her in his basement. Amanda Berry was next. She vanished on April 21, 2003, the day before her 17th birthday, after finishing her shift at Burger King. Castro's children knew her. He offered her a ride home. She called her sister around 8 that evening to say she was getting a ride. She never arrived. Gina DeJesus was taken on April 2, 2004, while walking home from middle school. She was 14. Castro was the father of her close friend. He offered her a ride, drove her to his house, and kept her in the basement. For the better part of a decade, the 3 women were held in a 1,400-square-foot home that Castro had reconfigured to conceal them. They were chained, given 1 meal a day, and forced to use plastic toilets. Castro subjected them to repeated abuse, forced them to play Russian roulette, and used psychological control to prevent escape. He forbade them from using their real names and pretended to leave only to sneak back and test whether they would try to run. Michelle Knight was impregnated multiple times. Castro starved and beat her until she lost each pregnancy. She suffered permanent nerve damage, hearing loss, and facial injuries. Amanda Berry gave birth to a daughter, Jocelyn, on approximately December 25, 2006. Knight was forced to deliver the baby, while Castro threatened to end her life if anything went wrong. DNA later confirmed Castro was the father. And in a failure that drew heavy criticism, police had removed Knight from the missing persons database after just 15 months, classifying her as a probable runaway. On May 6, 2013, Castro left the house and failed to lock an interior door. Amanda Berry pounded on the outer storm door and screamed. A neighbor named Charles Ramsey and another man named Angel Cordero kicked through the door. Berry crawled out with 6-year-old Jocelyn and called 911, telling the dispatcher her name, that she had been missing for 10 years, and that she was free. Police arrived and found Knight and DeJesus upstairs. Castro was arrested at a nearby McDonald's parking lot. After more than a decade of captivity, 3 women were finally free. But given the almost incomprehensible scope of what Castro had done, what would justice even look like? Castro was initially charged with 4 counts of kidnapping and 3 counts of rape. By July of 2013, 2 grand jury indictments had expanded the charges to 977 total counts, including kidnapping, rape, felonious assault, child endangerment, and 2 counts of aggravated taking of life for the forced termination of pregnancies. On July 26th, Castro pleaded guilty to 937 of the 977 counts. Prosecutors dropped the possibility of the death penalty in exchange for life without parole plus 1,000 years plus a $100,000 fine. At sentencing on August 1st, Knight addressed Castro directly. She told him he had taken 11 years of her life, that she had spent 11 years in hell, and that his hell was just beginning. The house at 2207 Seymour Avenue was demolished on August 7th as part of the plea agreement. On September 3rd, 2013, barely 1 month into his sentence, Castro was found hanging from a bedsheet in his cell at the Correctional Reception Center in Orient, Ohio. He was in protective custody, but not on suicide watch. The county coroner and 2 subsequent investigations ruled his passing a suicide. He was 53. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at an undisclosed location. The 3 survivors have each rebuilt their lives in their own way. Michelle Knight changed her name to Lily Rose Lee and authored 2 memoirs, including a #1 bestseller. She married on May 6, 2015, the 2nd anniversary of her rescue, and founded a charitable foundation. Amanda Berry co-authored a memoir with Gina DeJesus and joined Fox 8 News in Cleveland as host of a segment called Missing with Amanda Berry, which has helped resolve more than 35 missing persons cases. Her daughter Jocelyn is now approximately 19. Gina DeJesus co-founded the Cleveland Family Center for Missing Children and Adults on Seymour Avenue itself, near where she was held. She trains law enforcement on how to engage with families of the missing. As of 2025, Michelle Knight is 44, living in Northfield, Ohio, running an animal rescue and continuing motivational speaking. Amanda Berry is 39 and continues her work at Fox 8. Gina DeJesus is 35 and runs her family center. Berry and DeJesus remain close. Knight is no longer in contact with them. Every case so far has involved a victim who was found by someone else, whether through DNA, a neighbor's courage, or a lucky break in an investigation. But the next story is different. It is about a young woman who, with nothing more than an internet connection and an old photograph, solved her own abduction. Carlina White. On August 4th, 1987, a 16-year-old mother named Joy White and her partner Carl Tyson brought their 19-day-old daughter to Harlem Hospital Center in New York City. The baby, Carlina Renee White, had developed a 104-degree fever from an infection after delivery. She was admitted and placed on intravenous antibiotics sometime between roughly 2:30 and 3:55 in the morning on August 5th. During a shift change, someone removed Carlina's IV line and carried her out of the 17th floor ward. A security guard reported seeing a heavy-set woman leave the hospital around 3:30 with no visible infant, though her clothing could have concealed a baby. The hospital's surveillance cameras were not functioning. The woman who took her was Anugeta Petway. She had traveled by train from Bridgeport, Connecticut, and had been seen around the hospital for 3 weeks before the abduction, dressed in nurse-like attire. Petway had suffered multiple miscarriages and 2 stillbirths and was desperate to be a mother. She was a complete stranger to the family. She took the baby back to Bridgeport and raised her under the name Nejdra Nance. Growing up, Carlina noticed she did not resemble Petway or anyone in the family. In 2005, while pregnant with her own daughter, she asked Petway for a birth certificate. Petway produced a forged Connecticut document that officials immediately flagged as fraudulent. When confronted, Petway admitted Carlina was not her biological child, but lied, claiming she had been abandoned by someone with a drug addiction. Then, in December of 2010, at the age of 23, Carlina searched the website of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She found a photograph of a kidnapped baby listed as Carlina White. The photo bore a striking resemblance to her own infant pictures and to her daughter. She matched a birthmark. With help from Petway's sister, she contacted the NCMEC hotline. DNA collected from Joy White, Carl Tyson, and Carlina confirmed the match on January 18, 2011. It was the first known case in which a kidnapping victim led their own reunification. After 23 years, Carlina had found her own family. But what happens to a woman who stole an infant from a hospital ward and raised her as her own for more than 2 decades? On January 23, 2011, Petway surrendered to the FBI in Bridgeport. The New York State statute of limitations had expired, but there is no federal statute of limitations for kidnapping. She was charged federally and initially pleaded not guilty before changing her plea to guilty on February 10, 2012, to 1 count of federal kidnapping. On July 30, 2012, a judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison plus 3 years of supervised release. The court described it as not a crime of greed or vengeance, but one of selfishness. Carl Tyson expressed that the sentence was too lenient, saying he believed Petway should have received 23 years, 1 for every year she had taken from him. This was the first known infant abduction from a New York City hospital, and the case led to improved hospital security protocols across the country. After the DNA confirmation, Carlina reunited with her biological parents. Though the relationship was initially strained, she eventually reconciled with both her biological and adoptive families. She continues to go by Nettie, a name she says she gave herself. In 2014, she stated publicly that she had forgiven Petway, saying that holding on to all that anger would only cause her own suffering. She spoke at the Crimes Against Children conference that same year and has since lived a largely private life. As of 2025, Ann Petway was released from federal prison on April 14, 2021, after serving approximately 9 years and 10 months with good behavior credits. She is in her early 60s and living privately. Carlina White is 38. Her daughter reportedly joined the military. Joy White and Carl Tyson are alive and have reconnected with their daughter. Alicia Navarro. In September of 2019, a 14-year-old girl named Alicia Navarro left her family home near 45th Avenue and Rose Lane in Glendale, Arizona, sometime in the early morning hours. Her mother, Jessica Nunez, had spoken with Alicia around 1 in the morning when the girl came downstairs for water. By sunrise, the back door was ajar and Alicia was gone. A handwritten note on her desk read that she had run away, that she would be back, and that she was sorry. Stacked chairs against the backyard wall suggested she had climbed over the fence. She took her laptop and cell phone but left the chargers behind. Alicia was diagnosed as high-functioning on the autism spectrum. She took daily medications, had a compromised immune system, and was described by everyone who knew her as introverted, shy, and a homebody who loved video games, particularly Minecraft and Roblox. She was not the kind of person who simply disappeared. Glendale Police, the FBI, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children launched an extensive investigation. But every digital trace from Alicia's devices went completely dark. Her mother ran a relentless public campaign. Flyers went up across Arizona, California, Nevada, and along the United States-Mexico border. Billboards were rented. A $20,000 reward was posted. Thousands of tips came in over 4 years, and every single one led nowhere. Then, on July 23, 2023, an 18-year-old Alicia Navarro walked into the Havre City Police Department in Havre, Montana, a small town of roughly 10,000 people about 40 miles from the Canadian border and 1,400 miles from Glendale. She arrived alone, identified herself, and asked to be removed from the missing juvenile list so she could get her driver's license. Police verified her identity through DNA. In a video released by Glendale Police, she was asked if anyone had hurt her in any way. She said no, that no one had hurt her. Days after her reappearance made the news, Glendale Police served a search warrant on a residence in Havre. They identified a man named Edmund Davis, then in his mid-30s, as the person Navarro had been living with. Court documents described him as her boyfriend. Neighbors reported she had been at his apartment for at least a year. During the search, officers observed Davis throw his cell phone into a trash can and pile items on top of it. Forensic analysis of the phone recovered more than 80 images of child abuse material depicting children under the age of 13. Given that Alicia was 14 and Davis was approximately 32 or 33 when she disappeared, what does the legal system do with a case this complicated? In October of 2023, Davis was charged with 2 felony counts of child abuse under Montana law. Those charges were connected to the material found on his phone, not directly to Navarro's disappearance. He pleaded guilty to 1 count in September of 2024. On February 11, 2025, he was sentenced to 100 years in Montana State Prison with 50 years suspended, making him ineligible for parole for 25 years. The judge noted that Davis had shown no remorse. The Glendale Police Department investigation into Navarro's original disappearance remains active and open. How she reached Montana when she began living with Davis, and whether she was groomed online, remain unanswered. Her mother suspects online luring through gaming communities. As of 2025, Alicia Navarro is 20 years old and living with her mother outside Arizona. She's working, receiving counseling, and preparing for college. Edmund Davis, 38, is serving his sentence in Montana State Prison. Alicia Navarro left a note saying she ran away. Alex Batty, an 11-year-old boy from England, did not even get that much of an explanation. He was taken on a family holiday and simply never brought back. Alex Batty. Alex Batty was born on February 13, 2006, and lived with his maternal grandmother and legal guardian, Susan Caruana, in Oldham, Greater Manchester, England. His father had left when he was 2. His mother, Melanie Batty, and his grandfather, David Batty, did not have custody. On September 30, 2017, Melanie and David took 11-year-old Alex on what was supposed to be a 1-week holiday to Marbella, Spain. Susan Caruana had given her permission. They were due back on October 8th. They never returned. That day, Caruana received a Facebook video message from Melanie explaining that she did not want Alex in mainstream school. In February of 2018, Greater Manchester Police formally declared Melanie and David wanted for suspected child abduction. For 6 years, the trio lived off the grid across Morocco, Spain, and France, carrying solar panels, growing their own food, and moving through alternative spiritual communities. They never stayed anywhere for more than a few months. Alex later described his mother as deeply anti-government, anti-vaccine, and intensely spiritual. After the age of 14, he was made to do construction and demolition work to help pay for food and shelter. He received no formal education for more than 6 years. He made only one friend his own age during the entire period. By late 2023, Alex had had enough. On December 11th, after years of growing frustration, he argued with his mother, left a farewell note expressing love, but explaining he needed to leave for his own future, and set out on foot. 2 nights later, at roughly 3 in the morning on December 13th, a 26-year-old delivery driver named Fabien Accidini spotted Alex walking alone in the rain near the village of Camon in the Ariège department of southwestern France. Alex was carrying a backpack, a flashlight, and a skateboard. Accidini offered him a ride. Alex initially gave a false name, but soon revealed who he really was. Using Accidini's phone, he sent a text to his grandmother telling her it was him, that he was in France near Toulouse, that he loved her, and that he wanted to come home. Accidini drove Alex to the nearby town of Revel, where he was handed over to French police. His identity was confirmed by December 14th. In an unusual detail, Alex fabricated parts of his story to protect his mother and grandfather. He told police he had walked for 4 days when it had been 2, that his grandfather had passed away 6 months earlier when David Batty was confirmed alive, and that his mother was heading to Finland. He later admitted publicly that these were lies. With Alex safely home and cooperating with authorities, would anyone face consequences for taking a child out of the country and keeping him off the grid for 6 years? Greater Manchester Police opened a formal criminal investigation on December 22, 2023. But on January 22, 2025, the department officially closed the case, citing insufficient grounds to move forward with any prosecution. Alex had made it clear he did not want charges brought against his mother or grandfather. His grandmother agreed. No arrests were ever made and no charges were filed. In another failure worth noting, in November of 2023, 1 month before he walked out of the mountains, Alex attempted to enroll in a school in Quillan, France, but was turned away because he lacked identity papers. School authorities reported this to police, but the report was never followed up. Alex returned to Oldham before Christmas of 2023 and enrolled at Oldham College in 2024 to study programming and computer science. He celebrated his 18th birthday in February of 2024. He has made friends, found part-time work, and started dating. He described his mother as a great person and said he loves her, but that she just was not a great mom. He also disclosed to French investigators that he had been abused as a young child before the abduction period. This detail was mentioned by the French prosecutor, but not further elaborated. As of 2025, Alex is 19 and studying at Oldham College while living with his grandmother. Melanie Batty's whereabouts are unknown. She reportedly sent an email to a former landlord saying she had to keep running. David Batty is believed alive, but his location is unknown. No charges will be filed. Alex Batty's case, at least, has a clear answer. He was found alive, and he came home. But the next story does not offer that certainty. It is about a girl who vanished in 1981 and a woman who appeared in 2003 claiming to be her. And to this day, no one can say for sure whether they were the same person. Mary Louise Day. Mary Louise Day was born on February 19, 1968, in Little Falls, New York. She had a turbulent childhood, moving in and out of foster care. Her mother, Charlotte Day, divorced Mary's father and married a United States Army soldier named William Hoole. The family moved repeatedly between New York, Georgia, Hawaii, and eventually Seaside, California, near Fort Ord Military Base. William Hull was physically abusive. Mary was once removed from the home and placed in protective custody. Her biological father, Charles Day, passed away in an accident in the late 1970s, leaving an inheritance for Mary and her sister Kathy. The sisters used the code word Mohawk to discuss it in secret. On or around July 15, 1981, when Mary was 13, the Hooles went out to dinner. According to her sister Kathy Pires, when they returned, William's dog appeared ill. William accused Mary of poisoning the dog and beat her severely. Kathy reported seeing blood coming from Mary's mouth. The next morning, Mary was gone. Charlotte told Kathy that Mary had run away and ordered her never to speak about Mary again. Charlotte then burned every photograph of Mary in the house. Mary's parents never reported her missing. Investigators later suspected they were collecting Mary's Social Security survivor benefits from her father's passing. The first missing persons report was not filed until 1992, when Mary's half-sister Sherry Calgaro contacted the military police at Fort Ord. Then, more than 2 decades later, on November 25, 2003, police in Phoenix, Arizona pulled over a pickup truck with stolen plates during a routine traffic stop. One of the passengers presented an Arizona state identification bearing the name Mary Day and the missing girl's birth date. The ID had been issued only 3 weeks earlier. Around the same time, a homicide investigation into William Hoole was intensifying. A DNA test confirmed this woman was a biological daughter of Charlotte Hoole through a mitochondrial maternal line match. But was she actually Mary Louise Day? After more than 20 years, with a childhood that left almost no paper trail and a family determined to keep secrets, could anyone be certain? There was evidence on both sides. She claimed she had run away to escape William Hoole's abuse, and that she had been taken in by an older woman named B.J. Ward in Salinas. A 1983 photograph obtained from Ward's boyfriend appeared to show Mary 2 years after the alleged incident. The police chief of Seaside at the time stated publicly that she was 100% convinced this was Mary Day. But there were problems. She had a thick Southern accent that the original Mary did not have. She could not recall key childhood details, including the inheritance and the code word Mohawk. Her stories shifted with repeated questioning. Her Arizona identification was issued suspiciously close to the homicide investigation. Mary's Social Security number had never been used prior to 2003. She used the alias Monica Devereaux. And perhaps most troubling, 4 independent cadaver dogs alerted to the same spot in the Hulls' former backyard, where a child's shoe, a teddy bear, and a belt buckle were found. No body was recovered, but soil analysis was consistent with a burial. Cadaver dogs also alerted at a second Hoole residence at Fort Ord in 2008. A private investigator who reviewed the case concluded that Mary had been harmed fatally in 1981, and that the woman in Phoenix was likely an imposter, possibly an unknown biological daughter of Charlotte's, since the DNA test only proved a maternal connection, not that she was specifically Mary. No charges were ever filed. The Monterey County District Attorney declined to prosecute William Hoole without a body. The case was officially closed after the 2003 DNA test. Reopened informally in 2008 and again in 2017, and closed each time. The woman from Phoenix eventually married, moved to Missouri, and passed away from cancer in 2017 at the age of roughly 48 or 49. She died 9 days after giving her final interview to the seaside police chief. No funeral was held. As of 2025, the case was featured on Investigation Discovery's documentary series, The Curious Case of, in January of that year, and on CBS's 48 Hours in 2021. Charlotte Houle is in a nursing home in Kansas and has declined interview requests. William Houle is believed to be living in Kansas and has denied all wrongdoing. Neither has ever been charged. The case remains officially closed, but deeply controversial. Mary Louise Day's story may never have a definitive answer. But halfway across the world, a mother in China spent 32 years searching for her son and with the help of facial recognition technology, finally found him living under another name just a few hundred miles away. Mao Yin. On October 17, 1988, a 2-year-old boy named Mao Yin was snatched outside the Jinling Hotel in Xi'an, Shanxi Province, China. His father, Mao Zhenjing, had been bringing him home from nursery and stopped at the hotel entrance to get the boy some water. The child disappeared in seconds. His mother, Li Jingji, was away on a business trip. She reportedly collapsed upon receiving the news days later. Mao Yin was sold on the black market to a childless couple in Mianyang, Sichuan Province, roughly 370 miles from Xi'an, for 6,000 yuan, the equivalent of about $845 in today's currency. He was renamed Gu Ningning and raised with no knowledge of his true origins. Li Jingji quit her job to search full-time. Over the next 3 decades, she distributed more than 100,000 flyers across more than 20 provinces. She followed more than 300 leads, all of which turned out to be dead ends. She appeared on national television programs again and again. In 2007, she joined an organization called Baobei Hui Jia, which translates to Baby Come Home, a platform that has helped reunite more than 3,000 families and maintains records of over 51,000 parents searching for their children. Through her advocacy on the platform, Li Jingji helped 29 other abducted children reunite with their families before finding her own son after 32 years of searching. Was there any hope left that technology could do what flyers and television could not? In April of 2020, Xi'an police received a tip that a man in Sichuan province had purchased a child from Shanxi in the late 1980s for 6,000 yuan. Officers used facial recognition technology to take a childhood photograph of Mao Yin and generate a simulated adult image, then scanned it against a national database. They identified a close match. The man was Gu Ningning. A DNA test confirmed it. On May 10, 2020, which fell on Mother's Day, Li Jingji was told her son had been found. She said it was the best gift she had ever received on Mother's Day. The formal public reunion took place on May 18, 2020, at a televised press conference organized by Xi'an police. In one extraordinary detail, Mao Yin had previously seen his mother on television, appealing for missing children, and was moved by her persistence. But he never realized he was the boy she had been looking for. No legal proceedings against the abductor or the couple who purchased Mao Yin have been publicly reported. Chinese authorities stated in 2020 that the investigation was still underway, but no further updates have emerged. For broader context, China does aggressively prosecute child trafficking. In a related case, a trafficker named Yu Huaying, who abducted 17 children between 1993 and 2003, was sentenced to death in 2023. Had the sentence upheld on appeal in December of 2024 and was executed on February 28, 2025. The scale of the problem in China is staggering. Experts estimate upward of 20,000 children are abducted annually, though no official statistics exist. The crisis was driven for decades by the one-child policy and a cultural preference for boys. Since 2009, China's Ministry of Public Security DNA database has helped reunite more than 6,300 abducted children. In 2016, the country launched a national alert system similar to Amber Alert, achieving a recovery rate of over 98% for the more than 5,000 children tracked through it. As of 2020, Mao Yin was 34, running a home decoration business in Sichuan, and had stated he would move to Xi'an to be with his birth parents. His parents had divorced approximately 4 years after the abduction. Li Jingji pledged to continue her advocacy work. No English language updates on the family's current status have been reported beyond 2020. Mao Yin's reunion took 32 years and the power of facial recognition. The final story in this series required something far less sophisticated. It took a few seconds of screen time on a Netflix episode and one person in a thrift store who happened to be paying attention. Kayla Unbahan. Kayla Unbahan was born on January 5, 2008, to Ryan Iskirka and Heather Unbahan, who had met at the Art Institute of Atlanta. Heather ended the relationship 2 weeks after Kayla's birth. In 2016, a Kane County, Illinois judge granted Ryan sole discretion over all medical decisions for Kayla after finding that Heather had been interfering with the child's health care. In early 2017, the court awarded full custody to Ryan. Heather retained unsupervised visitation rights. On July 4, 2017, Heather took 9-year-old Kayla to a 4th of July parade in Wheaton, Illinois. She was due to return Kayla the following evening. When Ryan arrived at Heather's father's house on July 5th, relatives told him she had gone on a camping trip to an unknown location in Wisconsin. Before disappearing, Heather had canceled all social media accounts and turned off her phone. Witnesses reported seeing her packing belongings to the roof of her car. A felony warrant was issued on July 28th. Heather first took Kayla to Georgia, then around 2018 relocated to Southern Oregon, where they lived until 2022 before moving to Asheville, North Carolina. On November 1st, 2022, Netflix aired an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, Volume 3, titled Abducted by a Parent. Kayla's case was not the focus of the episode. Her photograph, an age progression image from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children showing what she might look like at 15, appeared in a brief roll call of missing children at the end of the program. The case had also been featured on the show In Pursuit with John Walsh on May 13th, 2023, which fell on Mother's Day weekend at around 7:30 in the evening. Someone at a thrift clothing store called Plato's Closet in Asheville's Westgate Regional Shopping Center recognized 15-year-old Kayla and Heather from the television broadcast. That person alerted a store employee who called 911. Asheville police arrived and arrested Heather. Kayla was placed in protective custody with North Carolina Social Services. The next day, Ryan drove to North Carolina to bring his daughter home. A brief image at the end of a streaming episode had just ended a 6-year search. But after taking a child across state lines and hiding her for 6 years, what consequences would Heather actually face? Heather was booked in Buncombe County, North Carolina, on $250,000 bond. She posted bail and turned herself in at the Kane County Adult Justice Center in Illinois on May 17, 2023. She was charged with child abduction, a Class 4 felony carrying a maximum of 1 to 3 years in prison. The case went through 2 years of pretrial hearings. On August 8, 2025, Heather pleaded not guilty and lost a motion to replace her attorney. Then, on August 11th, as potential jurors waited to be questioned, she changed her plea to guilty. On October 8th and 9th of 2025, the judge sentenced her to 2 years of probation, plus 6 months of GPS monitoring and no contact with Kayla. No jail time was imposed. The court cited documented health issues, including being underweight, having a compromised immune system, and digestive problems. Supported by medical professionals who warned that incarceration could worsen her conditions. Heather has maintained on social media, through a page titled Justice for Heather and Kayla Unbahan, that Ryan was emotionally abusive and that the Kane County court system was corrupt. She wrote in April of 2025 that she fled with Kayla to protect her. These claims are unverified and were not permitted as a defense per the judge's ruling. As of 2025, Kayla is 17 and living with her father in South Elgin, Illinois. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Ryan and his wife Lisa have said that Kayla is doing extremely well, that she is thriving, making friends, and enjoying every moment of her senior year of high school. Heather, approximately 42, is on probation with GPS monitoring and barred from contacting Kayla. Ryan's message to other families with missing loved ones is simple. No matter how much time has passed, your loved one can still be found. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, consider subscribing. And if you want to see the next video, click here.